Hello everybody, I'm Sean, and today I want to talk about 3 types of useful coping mechanisms to use during depression. Now, we all need to cope. Coping itself is not a bad thing, it's just that coping is not necessarily the final step to take in order to reach the final state of our healing process, right? Because coping is just one step we need to take, right? But it's not the final step in order to start our healing process, right? A lot of us get attached to coping, right? And we fall down certain paths of coping, right? Because, like I said, coping is not a bad thing, but what are your coping mechanisms, right? Because a coping mechanism could be to smoke weed all day and drink a bunch of alcohol, but also a coping mechanism could be to just read a book or just lay down, right? So coping is not a bad thing, right? We all need to cope. Some of us can't deal with, our trigger in the moment, our panic attacks in the moment. We need that quick fix. It's understandable, but coping can turn into a bad thing when we fall down these paths that our coping mechanisms turn into our new normal. And now we think that this is what we need every single day, right? This is our new normal, right? It's normal for us to drink alcohol now. Basically, like, it turns into an addiction, a habit, a bad habit, just to cope, right? That's when coping mechanisms and coping turns into a negative thing, right? It's almost like a defense mechanism, kind of, because you're defending yourself against your pain by just getting super attached to these coping mechanisms, right? And these coping mechanisms essentially take over your whole life, just like an addiction, right? So a coping mechanism is much more different than just an addiction, right? If you think you're coping and actually healing with drugs and alcohol, that's not even close to starting the healing process, right? So coping is just to heal right now, right? Like I said, we all need that quick fix sometimes, right? We all need to just fix right now, right? But to heal the pain, you have to heal the pain totally, right? So it can be a good thing to cope, but you just have to make sure you take further steps and take the more final steps in order to truly start your healing process. Because every coping mechanism will just heal now, but what are useful coping mechanisms that I use and that you could use during depression specifically? Now, the first coping mechanism that I would like to talk about is have a meaningful experience. A lot of times through depression, we have meaningless days. We're in bed all day. We don't want to do anything, right? A lot of times through goals in depression, right, our perception changes from depression through goals, right? We think we're gonna fail, right? We look at ourselves as a failure. We have this self-belief system of ourselves as a failure, someone who's always just gonna fail, right? Someone who's just always going through BS, someone who's always having bad days, right? All that is coming from your belief systems, right? That every day is just bad, everything sucks, right? That's what happens through depression, right? So a lot of times through goals, also what happens is that through depression, we're either focused so on the future or completely focused on exactly what we're doing, right? And a lot of times when people get stuck in either, right, they're not really having a meaningful experience. They don't really love what they're doing, right? So essentially what this means is that do something that you genuinely enjoy, right? Have a meaningful experience, have a meaningful day, right? Just sitting in bed all day could be meaningful, but it also could be not, right? Sometimes it could be the opposite. Sometimes doing so much could be non-meaningful, and sometimes sitting in bed all day and just chilling could actually be meaningful because that's actually what you want to do, right? So it really just depends on why are you doing what you're doing, right? Are you doing it in a response to your trauma? Are you just trying to hide from your pain, or are you really just doing what you actually want to do, right? When I make my videos, right, I'm not gonna start schoolwork and homework until I make a video, right? Because I'm having meaningful days, right? I'm putting my priorities first. I'm doing what I love first, and then I'm gonna do my schoolwork, and then I'm gonna chill first, then I'm gonna get my stress out of the way. Even though that might be bad for some people, they might want to get the stress out of the way, then chill, but I want to chill first. I put my priorities first, right? That's just me, right? I'm having meaningful days. I'm not just allowing things to affect me every single day, right? All my experiences are meaningful, right? Not necessarily means that they have some crazy meaning, right? Not like that, like my whole life has to have some sort of meaning, no. But I'm not so focused on the future or what exactly I'm doing. I'm just living completely natural and living just in my truest being, right? So that is the first useful coping mechanism to have during depression, is to have a meaningful experience, right? Because a lot of times through depression, we have moments of bliss, right? But those moments don't last forever, right? We just find those moments, right? But getting super attached to that bliss is what a lot of us have. Even myself, I had that problem. When I found these moments, I just would want to hold on so tight to those moments, which would actually make it worse because these moments would always fade away, right? And then I would go back to having a non-meaningful day or days, right? So have a meaningful experience, have a meaningful life, right? Do what you want. Don't do what you're doing in a reaction to your depression or in a reaction to your pain just to hide or cope in a negative way, right? Have a meaningful experience, a meaningful life, right? Don't identify with your depression. So that is the first coping mechanism that is useful to use during depression. Now the second useful coping mechanism to use during depression, and this is my favorite and has helped me tremendously, is to take a hot shower. Now a lot of times during depression, from depression comes anxiety. From anxiety can come depression, right? It's either or, right? But a lot of times for me, right, what I experienced is when I was depressed, I went through anxiety, right? My anxiety started to pour out onto my body, right? And a lot of times I had crazy anxiety on my body, and crazy anxiety that started to pour out on my body because my mind basically just exploded, right? I felt like I had a hurricane inside my body. I started to get tense, itchy, right? Start to panic, right? Have a sensory overload in my body. And one thing that really helps is to just take a hot shower. Even if you're just having overthinking thoughts, right? Taking a hot shower can be a very useful coping mechanism to use during depression, because a lot of times during depression, right, we don't want to do anything. We don't want to get up out of bed, right? And a hot shower can actually energize you in a way to not necessarily get you so hype, right, and just awake. It can actually make you chill and actually possess good energy and really cleanse out your body and just make you genuinely feel good, right? Even if it's just for a couple minutes, a couple hours, right? It will genuinely make you feel good. And that's a very useful coping mechanism that I use, because a lot of times through anxiety you have muscle spasms, your body is tense, you feel dirty, you feel yucky, right? You don't feel clean, you don't feel good with yourself or your body, right? So when you take a hot shower, you feel clean, you feel good, you feel like you're taking care of yourself, right? So that is a very useful, easy coping mechanism that I use and that you could use during depression. And that is the second coping mechanism. So the third and last coping mechanism that I want to talk about is that read about somebody else's depression story. Now a lot of times through depression, right, we're confused, right? We don't know why our problems are occurring, right? And this is a very useful coping mechanism that I use too, right? Because a lot of times I was lost during depression. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know why I was happening. I was so confused. I was essentially living in a mindfuck, right? I didn't know why things were happening. I didn't know why I was going through and what I was going through, right? And I felt all alone, right? A lot of times through depression, you feel so alone. You feel like you're the only one here, right? Going through what you're going through. Nobody else can relate to you, right? And you don't want to talk about it because it feels like you have nobody. Sometimes through depression, you're just all alone, right? Even if you have people around you, you feel so alone, right? You're just the only one who really knows about your pain, and the only one who really can actually heal it, right? So one thing that really helped me realize what I was going through, and that was a very useful coping mechanism, is to read about somebody else's depression story. A lot of times I go on Reddit, right? I go on Google and I just search up, you know, what exactly I'm feeling, right? And a lot of times when I did this, especially when I first did this, it brightened up my day, because I realized there's so many people going through exactly what I'm going through. And as I read it, and I read, this is what somebody is going through, and that's exactly what I'm going through, I was able to get a relation, like a connection of some sort, to basically feel like I'm not alone, to feel like I'm not the only one going through this. This is something that I can actually get over, right? It gave me hope, right? Because there's a whole community of the world that goes through depression, goes through mental health issues, right? Goes through complex PTSD, right? There's a whole community that you could find on the internet and just really connect with, even if you're not really talking to somebody, just reading somebody else's story, right? It can really help and be a very useful coping mechanism, and a very positive coping mechanism to really help you really cope with your depression and cope with your pain, and really feel like some sort of love that you're not the only one going through this, right? You can get through this. It gives you a lot of hope. But one thing that I will say about this coping mechanism is that the only problem I had with this coping mechanism is that this is a type of coping mechanism that can turn into a crazy addiction, right? Because for trauma, for therapy, right, you don't want to do too much. You don't want to go so fast, but you don't want to go so slow, right? It's all about having true balance, right? So when you read about somebody else's depression story, one thing that I got caught up in is that I started to identify as, oh, this is my story, right? Or I started to get super attached to it, like reading all types of depression stories, which actually made me more depressed, which actually made me feel more bad, because I'm just reading all about depression now, so obviously I'm just gonna get depressed, right? So you can read about somebody else's depression story, but don't let it remind you of depression in a way that now that is making you feel more depressed. No, this is a way to heal. So don't read too much about depression, right? About somebody's depression story, right? A lot of times I didn't even read about what somebody was going through. I read about how people got out of their depression, right? And how, why am I going through this? Not what am I going through, why, right? Not just focusing on exactly what am I going through, so I'm just feeding that depression, right? So yeah, so those are 3 very useful coping mechanisms that me myself I use, and that anybody else can use very easily. And none of these coping mechanisms are going to be negative and take a toll on your life. But the thing about coping mechanisms is that any coping mechanism, if you do too much of it, it will hurt you, no matter, even if it's the most positive thing, right? Too much positivity is not good, right? That doesn't mean be negative, right? No, you just have to have a balance, right? But true balance is just when both sides are completely dissolved, right? You don't have to think about the positive or negative. You're just completely balanced out in a natural way, when you can truly just be at peace.